Assemblyman Clifford Crouch.
I don't know about you, but my fingernails are getting pretty tired of hanging on. And that's the way a lot of farmers are out there, just barely hanging on until they can get a little reap the awards from the gas drilling on their properties or nearby. It's time. It is certainly time. We have beat this thing to death. We have researched it, and I disagree with those people out there that say we need more time to study it. I mean, we've studied this thing to death. I have taken the time personally, as I've said many times, to call Pennsylvania and Texas and Wyoming and Colorado to really find out what's behind some of this stuff that all the negative stuff that we hear. And the misinformation out there is just unbelievable. You know that. You know that. And I have, talking to the regulatory people, the Department of Health, those that regulate the drilling itself, I haven't found one incident where there's been a real problem. You hear about the hair falling off the cattle down in Pennsylvania, and they're dying, and they're having abortions. Abortions aren't illegal down there anyways, but still, we're talking about cattle. We're talking about cattle. But, you know, and I talked to Penn State University, Dr. David Wolfgang, and he worked specifically with a herd that was quarantined for a year. No issues. And all the necropsies, they did have some calving issues, but they did autopsies and necropsy tests of every organ. Not one incident of chemical contamination. That ought to say something. Talked to an extension specialist down there, cooperative extension, well revered as far as being very knowledgeable and out and around, livestock specialist. He said he worked in 3 counties out of the 6 that have drilling. He said he knew almost every livestock producer and every veterinarian in the area that he worked. Not one incident that he knew of had ever been told to him or anything. No indication whatsoever of hair falling off the livestock, animals getting sick, dying, high abortion rates, or anything like that. He said the only time he hears about it is from somebody that's against gas drilling. That ought to tell you something. I had a dinner with one of my colleagues, a Democratic colleague out of New York City, representing a district down in New York City just the other night. And you know, it's a chance to sit down, kind of relax, the press wasn't there, whatever. I said, where are you on this gas drilling? He said, I've been pressured down in my district to take a stand on it. He said, I told him, I held him off, I told him I need more information. He said, they didn't like that. And so I related my story to him. I said, I don't just go on the internet and download stuff. And I said, unfortunately, a lot of people are banking on YouTube videos. I've been given, I don't know how many times, what they call documentation, that there's a problem. And it all is basically a list of YouTube videos. When did YouTube become a basis of science? It just, you know, blows my mind. I was sent an article, a web link to a Scientific American. And the headlines in that article was fracking causes water pollution in Wyoming. So I read it, and if you really read the article, it didn't quite commit to that way down about the second to the last paragraph. This is the issue out in Pavilion. It did mention that they found one chemical that could be tied to fracking. It didn't tie it, but I've also, the other thing, I downloaded a couple things off the internet. One was the EPA draft report of the issue in Wyoming. And they're still looking at it. They're questioning even their own sampling, quite frankly, of potential contamination, because it showed up in one lab test, in one sample out of potentially 12 that was divided out over 3 labs. And none of that same sample in other 2 labs didn't have anything in it. So there's question there. And if it was a problem, go look at the regulations. Didn't require the initial casing go down below the water table. Didn't require the cementing from the bottom all the way up to the top. So I think we've got pretty damn good regulations as we currently stand here right today. And they're about to get even better. Issues in Colorado. The gentleman told me, he said, well, we allowed them to store in unlined ponds, under-designed ponds. And so there's pollution from surface. You couldn't store in an unlined pond anything in today under our current regulations. I haven't been able to do that for years with DEC. We've got darn good regulations. People that I talked to, you know, I had a gentleman call me and we ended into a 45-minute conversation. He kept telling me all the negatives, and every time he'd give me a negative, I'd push back. And I said, oh no, I've called here, I've called there, I've been to Pennsylvania, whatever. And I said, Gentleman's name was Alex. I said, have you been to Pennsylvania? And he said, well, no, but I've heard things. And I said, well, you know what, I try to go to the source. I went to Pennsylvania, I spent time down there, talked to the locals and talked to the commissioner, county commissioner, and I said, I found out for myself. I always try to put things in perspective. And I said, I didn't see all this negative stuff. He said, well, we just don't want the industrialization of the landscape. I said, that's where you need to go to Pennsylvania. I said, because we had to look for a couple wells, and I said, you know, they're covered over, everything's greened up after the drilling, the pad's gone, everything. I said, you really don't see it. I said, I stood not too far from a compressor station, could hardly hear it. I said, so it's not out there. And he said, well, I just don't need that industrialization. He wouldn't leave it alone. I said, well, let me put things in perspective. I said, I could take you to a factory that just a handful of years ago employed about 70 people, and then it was purchased by a different individual, and now, I said, it's employing well over 900. It takes in 50 to 60 tractor-trailer loads a day, every day of material. And he said, yeah, you see, we don't need that. We don't want those jobs. And I said, this is a yogurt factory. Don't we want those jobs? I said, I haven't heard anything. Tell me different. I said, you got to put it in perspective. So we're still out there fighting back on all this stuff, and we're there for you. We're going to keep on fighting. Governor Cuomo, it's time. Let's get this thing moving so we can go to the next stage.